Welcome to the program, friend. Behind all of this hair, it is I, your servant. I am in a movie this summer, and I apologize that I need to let my hair grow and my beard grow. It's part of my role. In case you wondered, I'm Randall Terry, and you're watching Voice of Resistance. Welcome to the program. Tonight we're going to play some quotes from some very famous people. And we're calling this politically incorrect quotes on Islam. And they're very refreshing because of their stark clarity. We are tragically in a moment in American history where the corruption and the fear are so deep and so rampant that people are willing to lie or ignore the truth. Just flat out lie, ignore the truth. So we're going to let some of the heroes of the past, and I would be willing to guess that every single person that we're about to quote, you really like. And we'll let them speak for themselves regarding Islam. Restraint. I think that any neutral observer would have to admit that I've used restraint in this series. The problem is this, that there are people in the Americas, in England, in France, in Germany, in Holland, and other European nations that are doing more than using restraint. They're actually lying. They're becoming apologists for Islam. And I'm not talking about Muslims. I'm talking about non-Muslim political leaders and non-Muslim journalists who don't either have a clue about true historic Islam and the life of Muhammad, or, worse yet, they do know its history, they do know its theology, they do know its law code, but they are still defending it and sweeping under the rug some of the more heinous elements of Islam and Muhammad's life. So I thought what would be both educational and a little bit entertaining would be to go to some people who maybe didn't use so much restraint. People from other centuries, really. So let's take a look through the eyes of not politically correct people, an Italian, a couple Englishmen, a Spaniard, a Frenchman, and a couple of Americans. Let's look at how they viewed Islam and or Muhammad. First, let's start with Thomas Aquinas. You're probably familiar with that name. An Italian Dominican theologian, one of the premier doctors of the Catholic Church. This is what St. Thomas had to say about Muhammad. He, Muhammad, seduced the people by promises of carnal pleasure, to which the concupiscence of the flesh urges us. His teaching also contained precepts that were in conformity with his promises, and he gave free rein to carnal pleasure. In all this, as is not unexpected, he was obeyed by carnal men. As for proofs of the truth of his doctrine, he brought forward only such as could be grasped by the natural ability of anyone with a very modest wisdom. Indeed, the truths that he taught, he mingled with many fables and with doctrines of the greatest falsity. He did not bring forth any signs produced in a supernatural way, which alone fittingly gives witness to divine inspiration, for a visible action that can be only divine reveals an invisibly inspired teacher of truth. On the contrary, Muhammad said that he was sent in the power of his arms, battle gear, which are signs not lacking even to robbers and tyrants. What is more, no wise men trained in things divine and human, believed in him from the beginning. Those who believed in him were brutal men and desert wanderers, utterly ignorant of all divine teaching, through whose numbers Muhammad forced others to become his followers by the violence of his arms. Nor do divine pronouncements on part of preceding prophets offer him any witness. On the contrary, he perverts almost all the testimony of the Old and New Testaments by making them into a fabrication of his own. as can be seen by anyone who examines his law. It was, therefore, a shrewd decision on his part to forbid his followers to read the Old and New Testaments, lest these books convict him of falsity. It is clear that those who place faith in his words believe foolishly. And you can see where you can read that, and also some of the surahs, some of the chapters in the Quran that St. Thomas was referring to. Today, many so-called Christian intellectuals believe that the God of evolution used billions of years of death and destruction to evolve the bodies of the first human beings. Then, they simply declare the theory of evolution as fact to justify their unproven scientific fallacies. By the grace of God, more and more Catholics are rejecting this modern-day mythology in favor of the traditional doctrine of creation, as recorded by the Bible, and believed and taught by all the fathers and doctors of the Church. To find out how sound theology and natural science confirm the sacred history of Genesis, visit the Colby Center for the Study of Creation, and be sure to check out our bookstore, which has titles like I Have Spoken to You from Heaven, A Catholic Defense of Creation in 6 Days, and A Catholic Assessment of Evolutionary Theory. That's the Colby Center for the Study of Creation. All right, let's go to a Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville. Now, de Tocqueville, some of you will remember, is the Frenchman who wrote the book Democracy in America, which many conservatives especially tout as a good overview of what American life was like in the early days of the Republic. Here's what Alexis de Tocqueville said. I studied the Quran a great deal. I came away from that study with the conviction that by and large, there have been few religions in the world as deadly to men as that of Muhammad. As far as I can see, it is the principal cause of the decadence so visible today in the Muslim world, and, though less absurd than the polytheism of old, its social and political tendencies are, in my opinion, more to be feared. And I therefore regard it as a form of decadence rather than a form of progress in relation to paganism itself. So, to paraphrase, if you were sitting around at a club having a beer, somebody would say, yeah, paganism, polytheism, not good. But Islam is even worse because of what the fruit of it is in society, the decadence. All right, let's go to an American president, Teddy Roosevelt, the 26th president of the United States. Here's what he had to say. The civilization of Europe, America, and Australia exists today at all only because of the victories of civilized men over the enemies of civilization, because of the victories stretching through the centuries of Charles Martel, that's Charles the Hammer, in the 8th century, and those of John Sobieski in the 17th century. During the 1,000 years that included the careers of the Frankish soldier and the Polish king, the Christians of Asia and Africa proved unable to wage successful war with the Muslim conquerors. And in consequence, Christianity practically vanished from the two continents. And today, nobody can find in them any social values whatever in the sense in which we use the words, so far as the sphere of Mohammedan influence and decaying native Christian churches are concerned. There are such social values today in Europe, America, and Australia only because during those 1,000 years, the Christians of Europe possessed the warlike power to do what the Christians of Asia and Africa had failed to do. That is, to beat back the Muslim invader. So this is, in case you're not clear, this is Teddy Roosevelt's endorsement of the Crusades. saying, look, if you look where the Muslim military forces overran Christianity, Africa and Asia, Christianity is all but extinct. And what we consider as social values don't exist in those places. This is Teddy Roosevelt writing at the beginning of the 1900s. I think it's by 1916 or so. And he's saying, look, I'll put words in his mouth. These are my words, okay? If you can't speak Arabic, thank the Crusades. If you can't speak Arabic, thank John Sobieski, the Polish king who helped save Vienna when the Muslims almost took Vienna in the late 1600s and could have overrun all of Europe. So those are the words of Teddy Roosevelt regarding the need for Christians to stand up militarily to Islam. And he wrote this at a time when most of America and most of Christian would say, yes, I am a Christian. All right, let's go back across the pond to two Englishmen, Winston Spencer Churchill and his grandfather, the Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill, most of us hear the name, we think of the Prime Minister of England who led the war against the Nazis. Well, he had a grandson, Winston Spencer Churchill, and he was in America over a decade ago, and he made a speech. He gave a speech, and the text of the speech was published in the news. I want to read to you a little portion of it. He said, at its most extreme, authoritarianism is exemplified by the isms of the 20th century: communism, fascism, and Nazism. The fascists and the Nazis were responsible for the death of more than 30 million human beings, while more than 50 million are estimated to have been murdered by Stalin and the Russian communists, while Mao Zedong and the Chinese communists are believed to have accounted for some 80 million. But today, a new challenge, another ism confronts us, and that is the challenge of Islamic fundamentalism. Have Muslim terrorists hijacked the peaceful religion of Islam? Or is there more to the story? The answer lies in the life of one man, Muhammad, the founder of Islam. Muslim terrorists see themselves inside a 1,400-year-old story, a narrative that focuses on specific events in the life of Muhammad. We are going to look at Muhammad's life using their most sacred literature. We will look at Muhammad at the Battle of Badr. We'll see him deal with those who mock him. We'll see the times when he used deception. We'll witness Muhammad's anti-Semitism. And yes, we will discuss Muhammad and his teachings concerning sex, slavery, and jihad. Friend, if you want to understand Islamic terrorism, get this series today. Now remember, I told you earlier in one of the early episodes that a fundamentalist Islam, or Muslim rather, is somebody who just goes to the fundamentals, the basics of the Islamic faith. So he said that the challenge is Islamic fundamentalism. Extremist Islam has declared war on the rest of the world, as evidenced by their ruthless attacks across the globe, overwhelmingly targeted at innocent civilians. Beside the outrage of 9/11, the bombings in Madrid, in Bali, in London, and most recently in Jordan come to mind. Those who have declared jihad against the West and Western values, such as freedom of speech, are doing all in their power to mobilize against us the large Muslim communities living in our midst. Unbelievably, Washington is urging Europe to admit Turkey to the European Union. Were that to happen, the Muslim population of Europe would skyrocket to 100 million and act, in my view, of consummate folly. Already, Judeo-Christian Europe is under siege from a tidal wave of Islamic immigration. The admission of Turkey would hasten its demise. Intriguingly, the dangers of extremist Islam were foreseen by Winston Churchill, that's his grandfather, all of 85 years ago, as I discovered to my amazement while compiling my most recent book, Never Give In, the best of Winston Churchill's speeches. Churchill is, of course, well known for his gift of prescience and specifically for being the first to warn of the menace of Hitler and Nazism as early as 1932 and of the Soviet threat in his famous Iron Curtain speech in 1946 in Fulton, Missouri. But how many know that he also warned the world of the dangers of Islamic fundamentalism? I certainly did not. All right, that was the grandson of Winston Churchill. Now, by the way, this is, if my memory is correct, this is over a decade old, okay? So he's warning people of the flood of Islamic immigration, of Muslim immigration, and that flood is nothing like the flood happening right now. So clearly he was ignored. So he speaks of his grandfather, Winston Churchill, warning about the dangers of Islam. Here's one of those quotes from Winston Churchill. It is, thank heaven, difficult, if not even impossible, for the modern European to fully appreciate the force which fanaticism exercises among an ignorant, warlike, and oriental population. Several generations have elapsed since the nations of the West have drawn the sword in religious controversy, and the evil memories of the gloomy past have soon faded in the strong, clear light of rationalism and human sympathy. Indeed, it is evident that Christianity, however degraded and distorted by cruelty and intolerance, Christianity must always exert a modifying influence on men's passions and protect them from the more violent forms of fanatical fever, as we are protected from smallpox by vaccination. But the Mohammedan religion increases, instead of lessening, the fury of intolerance. It was originally propagated by the sword, and ever since, its votaries have been subject, above the people of all other creeds, to this form of madness. In a moment, the fruits of patient toil, the prospects of material prosperity, the fear of death itself are flung aside. The more emotional Pathans, those are the people of Pakistan or Afghanistan, the more emotional Pathans are powerless to resist. All rational considerations are forgotten. Seizing their weapons, they become ghazis, that's Muslim warriors or jihadists, as dangerous and as sensible as mad dogs, fit only to be treated as such. While the more generous spirits among the tribesmen become convulsed in an ecstasy of religious bloodthirstiness, poorer and more material souls derive additional impulses from the influence of others, the hopes of plunder and the joy of fighting. Thus, whole nations are roused to arms. Thus, the Turks repel their enemies. The Arabs of the Sudan break the British squares, and the rising on the Indian frontier spreads far and wide. In each case, civilization is confronted with militant Mohammedanism. The forces of progress clash with those of reaction. The religion of blood and war is face to face with that of peace. Luckily, the religion of peace is usually the better armed. Winston Churchill, calling Islam the religion of blood and war. He wasn't constrained by the politically correct insanity of our day, and oh, by the way, he had read. One of the reasons that we put these references in the first 10 episodes and in this extras reel is so that we can stimulate people to do research, to read these documents from the heart and soul of Islam, to read them for yourself. Okay? We are not making this stuff up. This is what Islam says about itself. So when Winston Churchill says the religion of blood and war and the born of the sword, propagated by the sword, All he's doing is recounting the Islamic history that we have looked at in these episodes. What Would Muhammad Do? Islamic Terrorism Explained is the best movie series documentary ever produced on the life of Muhammad and Islam. How do I know? Because it's what critics are saying. John Moore, radio host and author, said, "I learned more from What Would Muhammad Do about Islam and Islamic terrorism than I've learned from everything I ever read and watched in my entire life." Best-selling author Dr. Bill Warner said, "What Would Muhammad Do is the best movie series, TV production on the life of Muhammad and Islamic terrorism that has ever been produced." Friends, this is what the experts are saying. No one has ever done what we've done. I encourage you to get 1, 2, 4 copies. Call 304-289-3700. That's 304-289-3700, or order it at the address or the website that you see on the screen. Friend, we have a series that will help you and those you love to have an impact on this country. It's called Insurrecta Nex. That's Latin for revolution against the killing of innocent people. This is the history, the philosophy, and the theology of social revolution in America. We look at the Stamp Act, the Boston Tea Party, the abolition of slavery, the abolition of child labor, women's voting rights, the civil rights movement. All of them have this in common: courage, sacrifice, dedication, and in-your-face tactics and rhetoric. That's one of the reasons that we've been losing the culture wars the last 40 years, is because the bad guys are using these tactics and we aren't. We will send you this 14-part TV series along with these manuals for students, a teacher's facilitator guide for only $40. Go to 304-289-3700, 304-289-3700. Well, we have another 10 minutes in this episode of quotes from famous people, and I wish we could have gotten to them all. We don't have time. And 10 minutes is just, I don't want to do one episode in 10 minutes. So again, I'm renewing my offer to you to get this series for whatever you can afford. But there's one other thing I want to talk about in this episode, and that is the lies regarding Muhammad and the sexual abuse of women, and Islam and the sexual abuse of women. All right? Sharia law is clear, the Quran is clear, and the Hadith are clear that women captured in war can be raped. They can be turned into sex slaves. Those two items, they can be raped and they can be turned into sex slaves. And this is because it's what Muhammad did. And they own it. Their literature owns it. All right? If you missed that episode, you can see all of the Hadith and the Quranic passages for yourself. And the passage in the Quran, or in Sharia law. And then ISIS boasts about it. ISIS boasts. This is Islam. Muhammad did it. His associates did it. Ali did it. Had sex slaves. So, God save us. Why do we have to lie? Why can't we just tell the truth? Why do we have to hide it? Why do we have to be afraid to let people know that this is actually what Islam is? Now remember what I've told you. This is a closed system. Islam is a closed system. If someone who's a Muslim says, what Muhammad did to women is reprehensible, it's evil, it's demonic, they are a reprobate at that time, an apostate, and they deserve death according to the Mohammedan system, according to the Islamic system. Because that's to besmirch his character. And the Quran has several passages that explain the rules for sexually abusing prisoners of war, female prisoners of war. It's just that simple. So you cannot have the Quran be an infallible, inspired revelation from God if those passages are corrupt. It doesn't work. It's a closed system. If you pull that one little piece of wood out, the whole thing comes crashing down. And it may be the Achilles heel in this day and age. Thank God that women are treated with more regard today than at many points in the history of the world. Well, let's show the truth about Islam. Maybe it will help bring this oppressive, misogynist, anti-woman religion to a little bit of a halt. get the series.